Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth from Gibson's Bookstore and I am very pleased to welcome back Jodi Meadows, joining us the day after launch for her new book, Nightrender. Woo! It's a wonderful book. She is joined in conversation by her friend, author Erin Bowman. Jodi and Erin both have many books out. Jodi, you may have read some of her books, My Lady Jane, My Calamity Jane, her Incarnate series. Erin is New Hampshire based, and she is most recently author of Dustborn and The Girl and the Witch's Garden. All of these are available from Gibson's Bookstore. Nightrender is as well. I have the tracking number from the signed book plates coming in from Jodi as well. So if you purchase Nightrender from Gibson's Bookstore, you'll be getting signed book plate, nifty sticker, and an art print, I believe. Is there a bookmark there as well?
Yeah, the bookmark.
Jazzy stuff, and the publisher sent us really cool pins.
Yep.
As well. So all of this can be yours. And of course, Erin, as she is local, is happy to pop in at any time and actually put pen on the actual book and sign for us. Both of you, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you for having us.
So we'll jump in. You two are old friends, so this is going to be a great conversation. To our audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat sidebar or the ask a question box below. We will be getting to them later in the event. Jodi, congrats again, day after the release. Please give me an elevator pitch really quick about Nightrender.
This is always horrifying for me because Nightrender is such a big and complex book. But it is about an immortal warrior who is tasked to save the people who have betrayed her, and she's got to stop the demon monsters from destroying the whole world.
Demon monsters destroying the whole world is like, there's your pitch, you know?
Yes.
Start with that. It is a complex book. And I know this because for everyone listening, Jodi has been talking about this book for quite a while with me, and I helped brainstorm some stuff, not trying to take credit here or anything. I'm just saying, like, I have witnessed this book from its early stages and how challenging it has been, but also it's a really wonderful and unique fantasy. So I'm so excited for everyone who's here to read it. I joked that like I was reading it and it's okay. I've read the whole thing, not actually the finished copy. So maybe I should reread it. I read a version. When did I read? Before it sold, maybe like right before you sold it to a publisher. It might have been that long ago now. So I'm sure there's new surprises in it when I go back through.
A bit different. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I read even back then was really special and amazing. So tell us, Jodi, a little bit. This book has been, the idea came to you a long time ago, right? Like even before you and I started talking about it. So maybe tell us a little bit about how or why you got the idea originally, and then how long it took to get from that point to where we are today.
Sure. Ideas are so weird because it can be so tricky to like place where they came from and what moment inspired a story. There's going to be cats wandering, by the way.
There might be children screaming on my end. They're with their father. Don't worry if you hear it, but just it's bedtime. So
they may be
who
screaming. Yeah, my cats won't be screaming, but because they've been fed, they're fine now.
Thank goodness.
So I don't actually know where this idea came from, but the way that one of the things that I know influenced Nightrender was about 300 or 400 words that I wrote way back in 2006, where I had this image, like opening image of a book, literally nothing else for it, of a young woman waking up alone and kind of disoriented, and really like that almost dream strength intensity of emotion that went along with it. And her stepping outside and seeing like this crowd of people and a prince and a king, and they expected something from her. She was supposed to perform some kind of task, and that's it. Like every time I go back and look at it, I'm like, I really had nothing. But I kept coming back to it. I kept wondering, like, what is the story here? And over like in 2017, I was like, oh, I want to write a story about a hero, about a warrior. And I wonder if I have literally anything to write about. And eventually that image of a young woman awakening is something that I ended up putting in a different context, obviously, but I ended up putting that into Nightrender.
It's really interesting when you talk about like being unable to pinpoint where an idea actually came from or started, because I feel very much, with the exception of like a few of my books, some I can picture exactly where I was. Like some came almost fully formed, but more recently, most of my ideas, it's almost like it trickles out, right? And you like mull it over for a while, and finally you reach some point where the ideas become big enough as a unit that you're like, oh, there might be a book in here. Like this actually might be a book idea. So I can totally relate to that. I didn't realize the first little snippet of it though was 2006. That was a very long time ago. That's amazing. I'm so glad it finally made it to paper.
I know. I can't believe that I still have the file. I routinely lose that specific one, so I'm not actually sure where it is at this very moment. It's somewhere on my hard drive.
That's amazing.
I hope.
Let's get some history. 2006. And so that character though that you pictured awakening, that's Nightrender, right? For everyone who's listening, she's basically immortal, right? And can get summoned on by the humans to.
Right. So in this book, as it is now, obviously like threw away everything from that original image. But in the book, as it is now, Nightrender is an immortal warrior. She's got cool wings, and she is occasionally summoned when humanity is in enough trouble with the Rancor, which is these demon monsters, that they need help, because humans are not great at killing them, and she is really good at killing them. That is basically her entire purpose. That is what she was built for, by these mysterious and long gone godlike figures.
And she is one of 3 narrators in the book. And Jodi does a really good job, everyone who hasn't read yet, of balancing these narrations. I feel like each of these 3 POV characters is really, really well formed and fleshed out. And they're all kind of with they have their own goals and their own wants. And so it's one of those experiences. I feel like sometimes you're reading books with multiple POVs and you're like, yeah, okay, I don't really care about this person. Like I want to get back to those other characters I like. And that does not happen in Nightrender. At least for me, it didn't. So I would love to know a little bit about like your writing process for that. Were there always 3 narrators? Was it only 2 at one point? Did you add anyone? And then like, what did you find the most fun about juggling all those POVs versus the most challenging? And do you have a favorite? That was like 20 questions. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm going to keep up with it. I'm totally not going to forget them. So originally, all my other solo books until now have just one point of view character, and they're all in first person. And aren't they? Yes, they are. Or like suddenly, so. Like I don't know what books do I write? Do I write books? Yes, so they're all in first person, one point of view. Occasionally, like sneaking into somebody else's if I feel like throwing the readers off somewhere, but this one is in third person, and I knew that I needed to create a little bit of distance from the Nightrender character, just because she's so alien, so strange to the reader. So I chose third person so that the narrator could do a little bit of work to sort of like explain things, humanize her in narrator ways. And then I thought, I also might need like an actual human to help tell the story, maybe a couple. So I ended up, after I decided that I needed them, I chose Rune and Han, a prince and a princess, partly to represent their kingdoms and give a larger sense of the world just through their history, through their narration. Is that all the questions?
What was the most challenging about writing them versus like the most fun or the easiest? And then who's your favorite?
I'm so glad you remember.
That's my job.
So I don't think I had a favorite, but I do think that it was incredibly challenging to keep everything straight. Like, who cares about what? What are they trying to do? What do they know? Always, always a challenge. But one of the things I really appreciated about writing multiple points of view is that if I wasn't feeling a character one day, I could just pop over to a different one and see what she's doing. It's a little more challenging when like multiple characters were in the same location doing the same kind of scene, but there's always another character who could be, more interesting to me that day.
And did you write, do you write chronologically? Did you go start to finish?
Yeah, generally. But I do think with these books, so that Nightrender and Dawnbreaker, the second one, I do tend to stay in that character's point of view, particularly if they're separated from the other characters. So if they're just like off doing their own storyline, I'll often just continue on in their chapters because I've got momentum, because I want to see it through, and it doesn't really affect the other stuff.
Yeah. And then you can go back and sprinkle the other ones in later, or like write them through and figure out how to split up your chapters and stuff. Yeah. Yep. And while we're on the subject of big worlds, you said one of the reasons you have all these characters is so that you can show all of the, their kingdoms and their different wants and needs. I mentioned this earlier, but Nightrender, in my opinion, has a very cool world, especially with the the malice and the malstops that they create and the rancor creatures. So I'd love for you to tell everyone a little bit about the world. And if that was something, it sounds like that was something you developed after you first had Nightrender. That was like your first little snippet. And so did you develop the world around her? How did you build that whole sort of malice universe? Talk a little bit about the time slips too, because I love that it's a fantasy novel, but it feels like there's a little science involved as well. Those weren't really questions. That was just tell me how your brain works. But please tell us how your brain works.
Hold on, let me just open it up.
Yeah.
I will start with the whole, like, it's a little bit science. I love science, and I'm always trying to sneak it in. There's almost always like a secret science in my books. So keep an eye out, I guess. But okay, so on their world, there's like this one continent called Salvation, and there's 3 kingdoms that are all kind of triangle-ish shape around it. And in the very middle is a magical like force field called Malstop, and it holds in this big scary area called the Malice, where the portal to the demon plane is sitting in there. It sounds really complicated to explain. It did not seem that complicated when I was working on it. But like there's just several layers to this like scary area. One of the things that attracted me to this idea of a scary otherworld place inside, in the middle of these 3 kingdoms was, I don't think you play games, Erin. Do you like video games?
Not really. I'm not much of a gamer.
Okay. Well, if there's any other big nerds out there, the Elder Scrolls games, you might have heard of Skyrim, probably. That's the latest one that's still like a decade old. Come on, guys. But one before that was called Morrowind. And in Morrowind, there was this island called Morrowind and a fence, which didn't really seem to do much to hold in flying animals. I don't know. It was a strange choice. But within this fence called the Ghost Fence, there were all these like blighted, sick animals, and going in there as like your character, it was a difficult area. All the monsters were a lot harder, and it was just spooky and different looking. And that has just always kind of stuck with me as like being really cool. And also it's a fence, guys. Monsters fly over. I love it though. Like, unashamedly love that game. And that just this idea of like something being held in not very effectively with a fence. Oh my gosh. So with the Malstop, it's just an energy force field. It looks like a dome. It's a sphere. It goes underground and everything, and it's holding in this area where called the Malice, where it's spooky. There's monsters. Yes, they are harder level than the other monsters. And it's like red and dangerous, and it's just like this whole other world inside their world. It is part of a different world leaking out, like a different plane of existence leaking out into their world. And to me, that was like one of the coolest opportunities to have literally anything happen, like all of these reality bending ideas. And that when the mal stop, this force field starts to flicker, little globs of malice pop out and sprinkle across the continent, called things like malsites, malice sites. My naming system is very simple. I hate naming things. And anything can happen in these. So, as you said, Erin, there's some time slips where time runs differently, which is one of the places that Han, the princess, gets caught in the very beginning. This is not a spoiler, where time runs differently for her. So she gets trapped in one, and she can look out of the mouse eye and see everybody else moving around super slow. And like a deer is just like in mid-leap for hours, and she's like, oh well, crap, I'm about to die of old age in here before they ever notice I'm here. There's others where gravity doesn't work right, where the atmosphere is gone, where where the fires burn in a forest just eternally, where ghosts actually are there. It's not just a ghost town that people have abandoned, it's an actual ghosts. Things like that. Just whatever weird thing I feel like putting there can be there. And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, they're one of my favorite parts of the book, at least the version I read. I still, again, have to read the finished version, but they were really well brought to life on the page. They were creepy, like you said, like they're creepy as you're reading them. And I feel like the unpredictability of knowing that like you don't really know what's going to happen in these spaces as the character adds a lot of tension for the reader too. So they were really fun to read about. And your gross demonic creatures are like really nasty too, in a good way. Like they're gross, but they're fun to read about.
Thank you. I find them horrifying.
Do you have an illustration of them? Is there one in any of your swag pieces?
Sort of. So my friend Drew Nightrender, and I think she looks really awesome.
She does.
And if you look very closely in the reflection on the sword, you can see some rancor faces in there. Like he really made it scary. I think they look horrifying.
It's one of those things where like sometimes the readers or the audience in movies, like the audience's imagination can almost do a better job sometimes than a visual interpretation. And I think that's why reading that book, they were so creepy to me, because I didn't know, like you described them well, and then I visualized it based on that description. But it's part of why I love books. Like your brain does all of that work for you if the author does a good job on the page. And I just remember being like, these things are creepy. These are nasty. That's
really good.
Yeah.
So I am not like a visual in my head person. I don't see movies in my head when I write or read.
Oh, really?
No.
I'm learning something about you. We are like totally opposite.
I'm wildly jealous of people who can do it.
Oh my gosh.
That sounds like a superpower to me. And I feel like maybe it has something a little bit to do with like the face blindness, but I don't know. So as I was describing, that's one of the reasons like my character descriptions are always so vague. Like, well, they have hair. But as I was like describing the rancor, I was like, okay, this sounds cool and awful, but like I never had this like complete picture in my head. And when my friend sent over his sketch of the rancor and the rancor king, he just sent them, I was like, oh my gosh, these are horrifying. What have I done?
So if you like ever have a movie or TV adaptation done of one of your worlds, you're just going to be like in for a treat. You're just going to like see it finally.
Yeah, I'm like, what? This is what other people have been seeing? That's amazing.
Yeah, that's so funny, because I definitely see my scenes like in my head like a movie as I'm working on them. And sometimes in really big scenes it gets confusing. Like if I'm doing fighting scenes or like a fleeing chase scene or something, like I've had to like draw myself like aerial shot bird's eye view maps and stuff to like keep track of where people are going and make sure it all makes sense. But I definitely see my scenes as I write them. And sometimes I get mad that I'm incapable of writing it efficiently and effectively enough to look, it's really hard. Maybe, I don't know which is better. I don't know if it's better to see it, and then try to translate that to the page, or if it's better to work in reverse, because it's really frustrating to not be able to match it. I'm sometimes like, I'm such a terrible writer.
No, that feeling happens regardless. So
someone here in the chat. Oh, it was Elizabeth, our
hi,
lovely
Elizabeth.
host. And this is true too. I'd forgotten this. She says part of what made the rankers so horrifying is that they were described in how they made someone feel. It's not just how they look, it's how they make like the characters feel, and that they felt wrong. That they're very like, just read the book, everyone. They're great. I love them. They're so good.
Yeah, you do. You love them.
They're disturbing and horrifying in a wonderful way. So I want to know, and who knows how much you want to talk about this, because I know it was a long process, and I know revisions were also, you said, some of the more challenging revisions that you've done in a while. What was your drafting process like for this book? And what was your revision process like for this book? And also, what do you like better? Do you like drafting better, or do you like revising better?
I like generally whichever one I'm not doing.
That's a good answer.
I do think that I might like the revision a little bit better, but I don't know.
I love drafting like when it's flowing, because you're like, this is great, and you're like discovering the story as you go. But once you get stuck or something is not working and the words don't flow, then I hate it, and I just wish it was done so I could revise it. So it's kind of the same answer as you.
Yeah, exactly. So my drafting process for this one started out really slow and staggered, because as a lot of working writers do, you kind of start a draft while you're in between other things, and then you've got to put it down and pick it up. So like I have really vivid memories of working on, I don't know, like really early chapters, like chapters like 4 and 5, while I was in Salt Lake City, and My Plain Jane had just come out, and the three of us were working on Calamity Jane during the day, and I would write an entire chapter of that book during the day, and then I would retreat to my room and I would write a few hundred words of Nightrender, like yawning, like absolutely tired, but like
that's sometimes the best
I needed
feeling,
to write
though.
this book.
That's sometimes the best, when you're like kind of cheating on the work you're supposed to be doing by like writing your side project.
Yeah, like it's still really hot then.
Yeah.
And then I guess I just like fit in the rest of it eventually, or like when I had a nice big block of time that I didn't have to any other work that needed to be done. I just sat down and like, okay, let's finish this thing. The revision definitely was a lot of work. I always do my own revision before I give it to anybody, of course. And it was long. The book was pretty long.
How long is the finished one, out of curiosity?
120,000 words.
Yeah, it's a nice big book for you people that like long, rich stories.
It looks skinny. It's not.
Yeah, it's deceptive. It's got tiny font and very small lettering space.
Yeah, it's formatted like an adult book. So that it takes up less room on the shelf, which means that you can fit more copies on your shelf.
There you go.
So I did my own revision and sent it to my agent, and like, please sell it. I wanna have a career. And she did. Good work, agent. And then my first edit letter for this book, I think that sucker was like 9,000 words long. I read it and I was like, oh my God, I have never had such an edit letter in my life. But it wasn't that soul draining, oh no, I become the worst writer in the whole world. It was actually really encouraging. And one of the things that I loved was she took me scene by scene, like, here's what's happening in this scene, and here's how we think it works towards your goal and how it can really work towards your goal.
Yeah, so you were probably like actively seeing how the book could be better as you read it. So
Mhm.
that probably made it a little less overwhelming, maybe. Yeah.
And we did the book in like the first half with all of the foundational stuff and getting all the setup stuff. And then we had another edit letter that addressed the rest of the book and the whole thing, which was really good. Like she had encouraged me in this very first letter to just make it weirder, really lean into it, and make the characters more of who they are. So then when I drafted or revised the rest of the book, I just was able to use that as a foundation, and that also helped when I started drafting Dawnbreaker.
Speaking of Dawnbreaker, you might not be able to answer this, so tell me if you can't, because I don't want you to spoil things for people. The book just came out. Most people probably have not read it yet. Is there a way to talk about what readers can expect in it? I feel like you end on it. Well, I actually don't know because I haven't read this version. Does it end on a painful Jodi Meadows solo book cliffhanger?
It does.
It does. Okay. So
different than the one that you read, but still similar.
Okay. So will people, I mean, I guess they're going to get answers to those awful cliffhanger questions because it's a duology, right? It's just the 1 and 2 books. Okay.
Right. You only got to wait a year.
Okay. Well, there you go then, people. So prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for a painful cliffhanger and know that a year later, you'll have all the answers.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, if Jodi does her job.
But
I'm
yes,
setting big stakes for you here.
I
don't
will
mess
tell
up.
You, in the second book, there is a very dark joke about cows, which I think is hilarious.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like you can't really have any context for it.
I don't. I'm very confused, and I'm looking forward to it.
You know what? This is, as a writer, you really just got to make your own fun.
Yeah. Well, I keep saying, this is slightly off topic, but I had a really hard creative year in 2021. I hated writing. I wasn't even having fun reading. Like nothing was joyous about the process for me at all. And a big part of my journey in 2021 was honestly just rediscovering my love for reading. And then in turn, all of a sudden that started to make writing fun again. And at the crux of it was like, you got to have fun. You have to find some fun in it somewhere. And if none of it's fun, you're working on the wrong thing, or you need to step back, or you need to reassess. Cause it's our job and it is work, but like there should still be at least pieces of fun in it. And for me, like I was working on books that weren't even contracted yet, meaning like a publisher had not picked them up. I was just writing a book, hoping to sell it. And like, eventually it feels like work. Eventually you get those like really long edit letters, like you said, and some of the fun gets sucked out by just the process of having to work on your deadlines and publish the book. But before all that, like if nothing is fun, even then something's wrong. So add really dark cow jokes, I guess. Like maybe that's what I was missing.
Yeah, I don't know. I got a similar question like that earlier, and I was like, what can I say about book 2 that's still being revised? And
I mean, I realized like as I said it, I'm like, this is probably a bad question because no one's read it yet. I know it ends on a cliffhanger. Like, what can you really even say? But so you guys all have that to look forward to. Yeah. Let's talk about your cover really quickly because it's really cool. It's really moody and dark and kind of creepy and unsettling and a little atmospheric and moody. I'm probably repeating words now, but anyway,
you're just using words. Yeah.
But they are all fitting for this cover. And it's pretty unique to me too. Like I feel like it doesn't look like a lot of other YA covers right now, which is a good thing. And speaking of YA, like this book definitely has crossover appeal. It reads like an adult fantasy to me in many ways. So tell me about the cover creation process, how involved you were, how it came to be.
I was super not involved.
As is usual in most publishing process.
I knew that they were looking at hiring an artist whose name that I can't say on here because there might be children watching.
I know
But it was cool because the second part of the name was Render, and it was like, oh, that would be neat.
Yeah.
But he wasn't available. He recommended his friend, Janssen, who's on Instagram. And I know that I've tagged him a couple of times in there, and he has a very similar style, and that was all I knew for months. And I was like, okay, we'll get a cover. Will I be able to see it one day before the book is out? And it was delivered to me one day, and I really liked it. It was very cool and striking. It had the same figure, a circle, similar colors. I think they were a little bit more red in the version that I saw. But the figure didn't have the wings, and I was like, who is this person?
Yeah.
Who is this? And can we please add wings? Otherwise it's just like some mystery figure.
I almost like can't picture this without the wings now either. Like, did I see that comp without the wings? I think I might have.
I'm gonna hold it up, and then all of you guys are just gonna have to pretend like you didn't ever see it. Let's see.
Yeah.
So it was like super similar, but I asked pretty please may we had some wings, and the wings were delivered. There were a couple of options. Some were like very sleek and like bird of prey looking, and then there were these larger wings, and it was like an entire 36 hours of back and forth, polling every single person I know.
Which wings do you like?
Which wings do you like better? They were like neck and neck for the longest time. And
well, I don't even remember what I voted for, but I like these wings.
Thank you. I don't actually remember either. Like that whole time is kind of a blur.
Did they like add the scenery too? Like, I don't like that comp you held up didn't really have like the forest growth and stuff in it, did it?
I think it had a little bit, but you know what my face looks like? Come on. Yeah, it was a lot. It was not as easy to see in the other one.
It adds more visual interest. I like the.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah, I'm really pleased with how it turned out.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's very striking, like you said. That's a good word. Cool. And you already have a title. Remind everyone the title for the second book.
It's called Dawnbreaker.
Dawnbreaker, and it has dark cow jokes in it.
At least one, maybe
and it
more.
is planned to come out a year after this one's like roughly a year from now.
Yeah.
How far are you in it? What stage are you at in the drafting / revising process?
The crying part.
Sorry, I asked.
No, it's fine.
Apologies.
So I personally feel like I'm a bit behind, but I know there's a plan, and I know that I'm going to be able to finish this book. The timelines with this publisher are a little bit later than timelines that I'm used to. So like, I'm always like, no, we're really behind. Like, no, we're fine. We're fine. Calm down.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. Jodi and I have both published with Harper in the past, and that was your publisher before this one. And Harper has like huge lead times. Like, you are done touching the book like a year before it comes out, basically.
It's
like
so weird.
You maybe do your past pages, which is like your final proofing of the typeset pages, maybe like at the latest, like 9 months before your book comes out. Would that sound accurate? And then since working with other publishers, and now Jodi has a different experience, both of us have seen that lead time does not exist everywhere else. And some people work a lot closer to the date that it has to go to print. So that's good for you if you're feeling a little rushed and a little behind.
Yeah, because I know that the way that I feel about it is a lie. It is just, this like last 10 years of experience with Harper that's telling me like, no, you're super behind.
Right. Well, and there's always the pressure too of like, when you have been mulling over an idea since, not working on it every single day since 2006, but this idea came to you in 2006 and it took this long to come to fruition. There's always, I have felt this too with certain sequels. My Contagion duology was the same way, like not as long as this, but the idea first came to me in like 2012 or something. And then the book didn't come out till 6 years later. So like all of that felt like development time. And then you have to write the sequel in
really
like
fast.
a year and a half. And it just feels like there's a lot of pressure. And sometimes it's half a mental game of like, I can do this.
I have
Just
written
because the
books
other one
before.
took that long doesn't mean this one will, especially because with sequels, I feel like you're more focused on it, like on the daily, whereas the first one, you and I both were like developing these ideas while we worked on contracted projects. So it's not the same, but it feels like it sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, like it's just, the time difference is so big.
Yeah.
Oh.
We're at about like 20 of, Jodi and I can keep chatting and rambling, but I wanted to see if there were any questions. Can I view the Q&As, or like, can only you do that, Elizabeth? Hi.
Queen today. I have some questions.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay.
In here. So when I was reading the book, I thought I had a clear idea of who the villain was. Gonna try and say this without spoilers. And as I read the book, it felt like you'd get new information and you'd be like, is that the villain? Is that the villain? And I felt like my perspective shifted so many times of the characters, of who the villains were. And I don't know if I have a question in here, but I mean, how do you shift?
I'm glad you brought this up, because it's one of those books that does not have an obvious villain. And I love stories like that because they're really interesting.
The characters are all quite fallible. Han, she's like the Princess Han is so unaware of how vicious she is. She reminded me a little bit of Cersei from Game of Thrones, where you're like, wow, that is a choice. Like, wow, you know, but at the same time, you're like, okay, I see how you arrived at this decision. And I see how it's like best for the people that you care about and for your kingdom. But can we talk about empathy? Or she's
Jodi, do you remember when I texted you after I read it and I was like, I don't like Han. And I was like, but she's great. Like as a character, like she worked in the plot, but I was like, I do not personally like her. Like, I don't want to hang out with her. Like, I don't like her.
I felt
No, that's true.
I couldn't, like, she's a terrible person. She's just a terrible person. Jodi, you sent me a review where someone called her a budding despot. And I was just like, that's it. She's a despot in training. Like when she takes power, people are going to be miserable. She wants what's best for the kingdom. But at the same time, people are like, oh, well, people are going to die. And she's like, yes. And, you know, and it's
very sad.
She is not a good person, but she was willing to do whatever it took, you know, and she's not doing it because she's like, twisty mustache, I'm evil. She's doing it. She's like, I have goals. I have plans. It's for the betterment of this and this. And she doesn't care who gets killed or crushed along the way.
That's why she's so interesting to read about.
She's the ends justify the means person.
Yeah.
I understood every one of her decisions, even as I was like, oh, would we make that decision? That's the decision we're going to make. But every time she made a decision, I'm like, all right, I see why she's doing this, which was fascinating because I'm like, it's fascinating to both sympathize with a character and realize like she's just not a good person. But her fiance, Prince Rune, is like a really good person. And he always wants to do, he's like, what is right? And not because he's like this heroic character. He's just a good person.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of oblivious about like, he's kind of naive. He's been, you know, trained, but he's been brought up to be slightly not submissive, but to be the second person. And so even though he's in this position of power, it's just like, wow, you need to step up, you know, and like, you need to not believe everything. So he's fallible there. And then you've got Nightrender, who is socially unaware, you know, she's just kind of awkward and grumpy. And I mean, like, to be fair, if I had been woken up after like 400 years and they're like, hey, we made a mess, ha, you know, and
yeah.
not going to welcome you. They're just like, nobody wants her there because of that thing that happened 400 years ago. Which nobody is willing to talk to her about. And she spoilers. Oh, did I lose everybody? Where did we leave me?
Well, it fast forwarded you really fast.
Oh,
You're
okay.
back. We're all back.
Okay.
All right. So she's for Nightrender, something happened 400 years ago, which nobody is willing to talk to her about, but they blame her for, and she doesn't remember. And it's one of those like, wow, y'all need to learn some conversation skills, but she's just very socially unaware, and she's trying really hard, but she's not good at being a people. Like she's not a person. Like she's not human. So these are all deeply fallible characters, but at the same time you can see all of their, how do you wrap all that together? That was like a 7-minute intro into this. But like, how do you wrap deep fallibility into characters and still have them make sense?
That's a question.
Gosh, I don't luck. Yeah, I don't know. Like, so when you're talking about like, oh, I didn't know who to trust or who was the villain, I was just like, I'm so glad that you felt that way, but I can't say it was intentional.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is like one of the things that like sometimes writing just works and you haven't planned for it, but it just did, and thank goodness.
I just want to interject and say that some of that is probably your innate skill as a storyteller. I know it feels like luck, but I think you're not giving yourself enough credit, Jodi. I think subconsciously your brain had like set these players up, and some of it was you.
Thank you.
But I know what you're saying.
Thank you
Just
to my subconscious.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I do. Well, that happens to me sometimes as I'm writing. I'll go, oh my gosh, how did all of this align like this? And I just go, thank you, Muse. Thank you, subconscious. Thank you for whatever wonderful writerly energy triggered that.
Right.
We have a question on that from one of our audience members. Jodi, I've always loved jumping off this same topic. I've always loved your books, always play with the idea of identity. In Nightrender, all the point of view characters' identities are initially defined by their roles, assigned or otherwise, and then redefined by their experiences as the book went on. Is that something you really set out to explore deliberately with each character's storyline, or something more unplanned? And if it happened unintentionally, that's just even cooler.
Really good question. Who asked that? She's so smart.
Alexa.
Oh, Alexa, man, you're really smart. Yeah, so I think in some ways I did think about the characters as like the sort of archetypes in the beginning, and then started peeling off the different layers and to what would make these, so like sort of like basic character traits. How would they get there? How did they get there? And what do their experiences do to those characters? So Han, for example, is, as you said, deeply flawed, a little despotic, but she has a moral compass, not in her own self, but through her cousin. So like Han understands that she is not a good person, and she's not trying to pretend to be, but she understands that her cousin is, sort of. I mean, I think her cousin's pretty flawed too, but that is not something that Han really understands. But she understands that her cousin is really good, and she uses her cousin as kind of a touchstone. Like, well, what would she do? What do I have to do in order to still get the results of, through the world that I want? But what would my cousin do as like it's a good person thing? And I think that adds a little bit more complexity, especially if a character is aware of what they are. I think that makes them a little bit more interesting. I don't think that answered the question very well. It was such a good question, and I'm not smart enough for it.
I think too, like sometimes you don't know as a writer, like the whole thing of like, does the journey and the experiences then shape who they become? I think yes, like that's the core of storytelling in general, right? Like the character embarks on a journey and something changes them, and then they're a new person by the end. And I think the circumstances of Nightrender as a book, like it forces all of them into difficult situations and dark places. And of course they come out changed. So I think it makes sense that you started them in these like archetype roles. They very much are, especially Han and Rune, in my opinion, right? Like they have been raised to be like, this is your role, this is your job. And then Nightrender literally has a role also. So like, it makes sense. And I think you did a really good job bringing them to new places, which I'm sure will continue in the sequel. They're not done with their character arcs, I'm sure.
They're not done. Oh, here's another fun fact about the sequel. Rune makes a friend.
Oh, yay, Rune. Sweet baby Rune.
So talking about changing villains, as the story opens, there are three kingdoms that are all kind of almost at war with each other. And without spoilers, you only really have the viewpoints from two of the kingdoms. You have Han and Rune, and then there's the third kingdom that everybody hates. And then we get a little peek into that kingdom, and you're like, who's the villain? They're not good people, but are they the bad guys? Maybe they are, maybe they're not, maybe they are, maybe they're not. And then it keeps changing. Are we going to see more of the third kingdom in book 2? Okay.
Yes, we will.
Are we going to see much more? Because I was very intrigued when I was reading, trying so hard to say this without the spoilers, but not everything is as it seems. And again, you're just like, wow, terrible decision, but I understand why you are making these decisions, because out of desperation, people make the decisions with the tools that they have. And you're just like, wow, really? That was where you went with this? Like, really? That's how it went. I really wanted to know more. So everything will, I assume, be explored more in the next. So how much more?
Do tell.
At this point, not a whole lot more, because there's not a whole lot more room for setup. And things have changed drastically there. The situation there has escalated, and it's no good anymore.
It's
That is one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that I explored, though, since, as you said, we have representatives of two of the kingdoms, and the third one doesn't really have a representative is like a point of view character. And that is one of the reasons that a character ended up going there. It serves the plot very well. But I needed at least a view into that other kingdom. And I think the character whose viewpoint we see that kingdom from, you already know when there's like, BS going on in their telling of like what it's like. And yeah, so I don't know. I'm still working on the edits for Dawnbreaker. I do know like there is a point later where that kingdom is visited yet again. And believe me, I had like these wild thought as I was working on edits for Nightrender. Should I add another character? No, 3 is quite enough.
It's so tempting sometimes too. And duologies are so tricky because like you just said, like I can't do more setup. Like book 2 is the closer. Like the story went like this in book 1 and now you're trying to go like this. And it's really tricky. It's very easy. I've done it before. I think Jodi, you've had the same struggle where halfway through book 2, you're like, oh God, I've just made it even bigger. I'm that much farther away from the end. They are tricky beasts.
Yeah. There's so many times as I was drafting Dawnbreaker, I was like, what if I just added another book?
Yeah. Because Jodi and I have talked about this. I find trilogies easier to write than duologies because they mimic the natural arc of a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Each book has those things, and then in a series, beginning book, middle book. And it's just, I don't know. I find it easier.
It's so straightforward.
Yeah, duologies are tricky.
One of the things I loved the most about visiting the Third Kingdom is how much it exposed character flaws in the person who visits. And you're just like, wow, because the kingdoms are so different, it really exposes the way that they think. And that was, I think, when I realized, how fallible this character was. It really exposed their character flaws in that different environment, the one that they weren't used to. And they say some things and they hear some things and they're like, well, that's just nonsense. And you're like, is it?
It's the fish out of water, right? As soon as you put someone out of their comfort zone or out of their norm and the things they're used to, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but next time I really need to showcase my character's strengths and weaknesses, throw them someplace.
Really showed what they were like when they were exposed to something different and the way that they thought. And it was very, very telling about this character. And that was when I had realization. I'm trying so hard here. I had realizations about this character where I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So I thought it was really, really excellent that those scenes where I was so uncomfortable reading when they were in that third kingdom, because it was so uncomfortable when they're making choices and they're surviving and they're doing things. I'm like, these are all terrible decisions, which is necessary for character growth. All right, I have one more question, which we were talking about, Jodi, just the other day. The residents of these three kingdoms, they've grown used to living near constant threat, near the malice. They've normalized it even as they fear it. And now they'd rather pretend it isn't happening rather than face it. This is your parallel with climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit.
I wish I had, this is an excellent question. I remember when I first read it, Jodi, I was like, this is a little close to home, even though it's fantasy. Yeah.
And Kingdom 1 and Kingdom 2 don't want to hear about it. They're just like, oh yeah, it's terribly dangerous, but it's not happening right now.
Thank goodness it's not happening.
We need to go, like, there's the things right here. We need to go save the world. No, you're imagining it. Yes, it's real, but not right now.
Mm-hmm.
Discuss.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is one of the things that I've always been really interested in talking about in fiction. And I think I would say that most of my solo books, if not all, explore that in some way or another. Like with in Orphan Queen especially, there's like this toxic byproduct of magic that is destroying the world, and people make big choices about nobody gets to use magic or you die, that sort of thing. In the Fallen Isles books, there's dragons and they're necessary to keep their god islands where they are. If the dragons go away, then their gods will go away and the people won't have anywhere to live. But bad things keep happening to the dragons. So that's just something that I've always been really interested in. It seems it just continues to seem relevant, unfortunately. And as some of the language that they use in here of like, yes, like it's just a cycle. These things always happen. Like we're just gonna be fine though. That's just real.
Panicked. It's not, it's just some people who are worried. Those are eyewitness accounts. No, it's fine. They're just worried.
Those are just the peasants. What do they know? Yeah.
So there's some very clear parallels there, of course, to our own world with climate change and people especially people in power, not wanting to risk, no spoilers, not wanting to risk their own power or threaten their own lives. They don't want any threats towards themselves. They don't want threats to their power. They don't want threats to their family. And if these things that they're worried about were to come true, it'd be their fault. It'd be their problem. They don't want that. So it's easier to deny it than confront it. That is uncomfortably close to the own world that we are living in. So it was a very interesting, when you sent me the link to the interview, it was a very interesting lens to look at the book through. That was it. Did you have any more on that topic that you wanted to talk about? What are you, What are you most worried about in climate change, Jodi? What aspect of the world are you most terrified for?
Every single thing.
Yes. And of course, you always hope that someone speaks up and rides forward, and there's a Prince Rune who will step up and do the right thing, even at one's own risk. Who we need our own Prince Rune now. We need a hero.
Yeah. We're gonna get the song. We're holding out for a hero. We're gonna get that song now. Can we play it?
So I'm glad you picked up on that. Okay, so Erin already asked who your favorite character was, and you didn't answer. And I know that you're not allowed to have a favorite child. Hildy and Hush, your kitties, won't let you have a favorite. But who was the most fun to write?
And it sort of depended on mood. But I think in a lot of ways, Hen was the most fun, just because she's so sarcastic and so dry, and she will do anything.
She's vicious.
I remember when I told you I didn't like her, you were like, she's my favorite.
Yeah, she's just so much fun, and she's different from the characters that I typically write. Oh yeah, speaking of my favorite children, here comes one. She's different from the characters I typically write in my solo books when I'm like in their point of view the whole book in first person. Those tend to be nicer people, a little more concerned with doing the right thing, whereas Han's primary goal is peace for everybody, which seems really great, but it's her way or the highway. And
she's not afraid to stab a person to get them out of her way.
Exactly.
I feel like it's a testament to your writing though, Jodi, that like that's not the type of character you've typically written as a POV character, and that you brought her to life so wonderfully that it created very strong emotions and reactions in clearly both me and Elizabeth, and probably many other readers. So like kudos to you.
Thank you. I do see like I'm pretty sure that she's my agent's favorite character in this book, and I think my editor has also picked Han as her favorite. So like people either really love her, she's super ambitious and does not take crap, and she knows her worth. She also knows she's super pretty.
Yeah. I want to make it clear that just like when I said I dislike her, I still like she's the most fascinating character to read about. Like I really enjoyed reading her, even though as a person I didn't like her, if that makes sense. That's why she's such a great character.
It's absolutely true. Everything she did where you're like, oh my God, you're horrible. Wow, you're horrible. Like I'm not inviting her to my birthday party, except she might kill me. So I have to. But so I'm not inviting her out for drinks or anything, but reading her is like, you did what? Oh, next page, and she was absolutely fascinating to read. And again, it wasn't like this overblown, twisty mustache, evil villain. You're like, okay, yeah, I see that. I see why you did that. It all makes a logical sense, even as you're just like, wow, okay, not a good person. And the best villains believe they are heroes.
Oh yeah, no, Han absolutely believes that she's the hero of this whole story. She has no question about that.
One of the things we're pretty much out of time, but I did want to touch, we mentioned earlier that the characters, this book has crossover appeal, different age ranges. Mm-hmm. Technically, the book is being marketed as young adult, and the characters are supposed to be 18-ish. You don't actually mention the characters' ages.
Very carefully don't mention it.
When I read it, I actually flipped back through, and then I asked you, I was like, how old are the characters? I read them as about 24. I don't know. Did you have an opinion for how old you imagined them? Erin, did you have an opinion?
Oh, me, sorry.
I can be Erin today.
They definitely felt a little older to me, but I also think as a genre, fantasy tends to like characters age up just because of what is expected of people in those types of roles. Nightrender, I didn't really place at an age because she's this immortal, like supernatural warrior, basically. And then I always kind of pictured Rune and Han as around like somewhere between like 18 and 20, but acting like they're 25, but also because realistically in their world and setting, a 19 or 20-year-old would be acting like the choices that they're going to make are not what someone, a 19-year-old in 2022 in America is going to be making. Like, it's not the same type of choices. So, and I feel like you see that in a lot of fantasy in general.
Yeah, I think teenagers in Fantasyland tend to have adult jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for
definitely
saying
do.
very succinctly while I rambled.
So I'm very hopeful. I'm going to be hand selling this to all sorts of age ranges because it wasn't expressly named, you know, it makes it so much easier because it did feel like they were stepping into their adult roles. They had adult expectations put on them. Of course, when you're royalty, you have literally been trained from this. And it's just like, here are your expectations, make it work. So they have adult expectations and responsibilities placed on their shoulders, but they're willingly stepping up. It isn't a case of like, I'm not ready. It's a case of like, wow, the world is kind of ending and we need to like save the world. But it did feel like it wasn't the traditional YA of first experiences. It was like, we know who we are and we're going to go and we're going to do the thing and we know who we are. I really, really liked that. And I know that you have to market it at a certain age range because that makes marketing so much easier, but I loved that it has that crossover. The book is still, though, however, appropriate for a teenager. There's not inappropriate content. You know, I think that the parents are more sensitive to it than the teenagers.
Absolutely.
It passed
90% of the time.
It passes the parent test. There's not inappropriate content. It's not overly gory. It's not overly like, there's not any steamy scenes. So it is appropriate for a very wide range. All right. Last question. Have your characters taught you anything? Erin, we can start with you.
Yes.
Oh, in general, like my characters?
Yeah.
My characters have all taught me that I'm not nearly as tough and courageous and brave as them. And I would die on page 2 in most of my books. That's mostly what I have learned. No, I mean, I don't know. At the core, most of my novels, like I usually send my characters on some sort of journey where obviously they come out believing something different than when they started. And usually whatever belief they come to is either something that I believed when I started the book and I'm taking them on that journey with me, or sometimes the act of writing is almost like a cathartic learning experience of me, like letting go of something I used to believe and getting to, you know, from A to B with the character. That's kind of vague, but like, I feel like I learned something about myself with every book that I write.
Yeah.
And Jodi?
I think that's fair. I think I also learn more about my issues
as
I write
that's
books.
True too. That's 100% true also.
Well, if you plan on uniting peace to your town through murder, we will be there to stop you, Jodi.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that stops me just on my own is I don't like other people's blood. So, you know, we're probably fine.
Valid concern. All right. Excellent.
Thank you
so much, the two of you, for joining us this evening. Nightrender is available from Gibson's Bookstore, and Dustborn, The Girl in the Witch's Garden, or any of Erin's previous books are also available from Gibson's Bookstore. Thank you to our audience for joining us on this cold January evening from the comfort of your cozy living rooms. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye, everyone.